from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Jamie Owen. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken arrives in Egypt after revealing the United States has submitted a draft resolution to the United Nations calling for a Gaza ceasefire. Our other headlines, the Israeli military says 140 people were killed during the raid on Gaza's Al-Shifa hospital. Hamas claims many of the dead are civilians. World leaders gather for talks on promoting the environmental benefits of nuclear energy. And China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi ends his first visit to Australia in 7 years. The United States has submitted a draft resolution to the United Nations Security Council calling for an immediate ceasefire linked to the release of hostages in Gaza. The Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, made his announcement in Saudi Arabia, the first stop of his latest Middle East diplomacy tour. He arrived in Cairo on Thursday for talks on a potential new ceasefire deal. For people in Gaza, a pause in hostilities is desperately needed. The World Bank is the latest to warn about food shortages and the threat of imminent famine. Well, let's talk now to our correspondent, Sarah Coates in Tel Aviv. Sarah, Antony Blinken claiming that gaps are narrowing in the negotiations in these ceasefire talks.
Certainly, it's unclear, though, Jamie, which gaps he's actually referring to, although he has said that an agreement is much more possible. Blinken went on to say that these negotiators worked very closely with the Israelis to put a strong proposal on the table. Hamas rejected that, came back with some other demands that mediators are now working on. And according to an anonymous Arab officials, they're hoping to get a counter proposal to Hamas by the end of the week. But really, these main sticking points still remain, and that is the end of the war. We have been hearing from Hamas that says it will only agree to something that ensures a full ceasefire and the return of people to the northern part of the Strip. This is something that Israel says won't happen. It says that it will not allow men of fighting age to return to northern Gaza, nor will it allow a ceasefire which leaves Hamas in power. So certainly still a lot of work to do, Jamie, but this is what we have been hearing from these mediators. They expect it to be a fairly long process, given that all of these proposals need to be relayed back, apparently, to the head of Hamas in the Gaza Strip, Yahya Sinwar.
And what's the latest on this expected major ground operation on Rafah?
Well, tensions certainly continue to mount, Jamie, between Washington, between Israel. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he said he made it clear to the US President Joe Biden during that phone call on Monday that this operation would go ahead, and this is why we've seen the US summon this Israeli delegation to Washington. They are expected there early next week to talk through potential alternatives to a ground operation in Rafah, which is something that Joe Biden says he sees as a mistake. It's important to point out that the Israeli Prime Minister and the security establishment here, the army, still hasn't put forward a proposal as to where these some 1.3 million internally displaced Palestinians down in Rafah should actually go, which is something of great concern to Washington. Here's what we heard from the Secretary of State, Blinken.
We've been very clear, President Biden's been very clear that we cannot support a major ground operation, military operation in Rafah. There are, as you know, 1.4 million or so civilians in Rafah, many of them displaced from other parts of Gaza. There's no effective way of getting them out of the way and to safety. And even the people that would remain in Rafah would be in terrible jeopardy.
And Jamie, there are fears that if Israel actually does go ahead with this operation down into Rafah, that it could completely derail, upend these hostage and ceasefire talks ongoing in Doha.
Sarah, thank you for that. Our correspondent Sarah Coates in Tel Aviv. Well, diplomatic efforts to secure a ceasefire come amid intense operations in Gaza. The Israeli military says since Monday at least 140 people have been killed during its raid on Al-Shifa hospital. Hamas claims many of the dead are civilians. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Noor Harazin, who's in Rafah for us. Noor, what more can you tell us about the situation at the Al-Shifa hospital?
Well, yes, regarding the Al-Shifa hospital, there is two sides of the story. The IDF says that they killed 140 members of Hamas in the raid on the Al-Shifa hospital. However, Hamas from its side says that most of the people who got killed on the Israeli raids on the Al-Shifa hospital and the buildings surrounding the Al-Shifa hospital are civilians, in particular displaced people who evacuated their homes weeks ago and went to the Al-Shifa hospital for shelter. Let us also talk about the current situation inside the Al-Shifa hospital now. Right now, while we are talking, the Israeli forces are inside the Al-Shifa hospital. There is hundreds of Palestinians who are also inside the Al-Shifa hospital, all locked in one building. We are talking about a number of patients, a number of elderly people who cannot move around, also a number of medical staff who refused to leave their patients alone. These people, it is impossible for them actually to evacuate the Al-Shifa hospital under the very heavy exchange fire and also the Israeli shelling on the area. The only way actually for these people to evacuate the hospital is by ambulances. That's why people have been calling upon the Red Cross and the WHO to intervene and evacuate the people from inside the hospital, just like what happened in the Al-Nasser hospital weeks ago. I myself talked to Diana Al-Harazin, who is my cousin, and she's residing in one of the buildings just opposite the Al-Shifa hospital. She said that over the past 3 days, the Israeli forces did not only raid the Al-Shifa hospital and arrested men from the Al-Shifa hospital, but also raided all the homes and the buildings surrounding the Al-Shifa hospital, arrested the men, and now, for now, the women and children are alone in the buildings under the very heavy Israeli shelling and fire, and they are putting these appeals on social media, posting photos and videos, calling upon the international community to intervene and evacuate them from that area.
No, I don't know if you managed to hear our report just a few minutes ago on U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken's shuttle diplomacy. The Palestinian Authority saying that this is yet to yield any tangible results for Gaza. What is the mood there? Is there a sense of optimism or not?
Actually, when talking about Palestinians here on the ground, they reached a point where they won't believe anything until they see it with their own eyes, until they feel it actually here on the ground in Gaza. Hamas from its side, officials, the Palestinian Authority, in many occasions, all of these officials, Palestinian officials, pointed that the visits of Blinken to the region only benefits Israel. And yesterday, during his visit to Saudi Arabia, Blinken talked to the Al Arabiya Al Hadath. He mentioned the resolution of that proposes a ceasefire. However, Palestinians, when talking about that to Palestinians here on the ground, they would say that we won't believe anything until we live it. We actually live it. And for now, Palestinians are looking at what is happening on the ground. I mean, all of what is happening in northern Gaza now with the Israeli raid on the Al-Shifa hospital, with the continuous Israeli attacks on Rafah, on Deir al-Balah, Al-Bureij refugee camp, northern Gaza. According to the Palestinian Health Ministry, 65 Palestinians were killed in the past 24 hours. The death toll here in Gaza is now up to 31,988 Palestinians. So with all of these attacks, with these catastrophic numbers, Palestinians do believe that the war would take more weeks.
Noor, thank you for that. Our correspondent Noor Harazin in Rafah. At least 17 people have been injured after Russia launched its largest missile attack on Ukraine's capital in weeks. Ukraine's Air Force said all 31 missiles targeting Kyiv overnight were shot down. Most of those injured were hit by falling debris. This is the first attack on the capital in 44 days and promoted President Zelensky to renew his call for more military aid from Western allies. Several EU leaders, including Germany's Olaf Scholz, have voiced support for using profits generated on seized Russian assets to be used to buy weapons for Ukraine. This comes as leaders meet in Brussels to discuss how to increase military and financial support for Kyiv in its conflict with Russia. The Kremlin has threatened what it called retaliatory measures. Portugal's president has named Luis Montenegro as the country's new prime minister. Montenegro, head of the centre-right Democratic Alliance, has been invited to form a minority government. This comes after 8 years of socialist rule. Earlier this month, the Democratic Alliance won a parliamentary election but fell short of a working majority. The world needs more nuclear power, so says the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency. Promoting nuclear energy was off the political agenda for many years for many governments due to environmental concerns. Now global leaders are in Brussels for a world-first summit aimed at increasing its use to help fight climate change. China's vice premier is among them. Environmental groups have been protesting over what they say are excessive costs and the dangers of nuclear power. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Stuart Smith, who's in Brussels for us. Stuart, tell us more about why this is happening. Well, I'm terribly sorry about that. We seem to have lost the sound to Brussels. We may come back to our correspondent, Stuart Smith, a little later in the programme, but in the meantime, we'll carry on with the rest of today's news. So how does nuclear energy work? Who uses it? And what are the benefits and the concerns? CGTN's Juliet Mann explains.
As the world's population grows, so does the need for power. Nuclear energy provides 10% of the world's electricity. But still, some 733 million people in rural areas are going without. To meet demand, there's been a push for more nuclear power plants. Nuclear is reliable, durable and cost-effective. Plus, the greenhouse gas emissions are low. In China, the Jiangzhou nuclear plant in Fujian province is in its second phase of construction, on track to power millions of homes. But nuclear energy, of course, has its downsides. Accidents like Chernobyl and Fukushima highlight the consequences when things go wrong. And disposing of radioactive waste remains a massive challenge. That's why scientists are excited about nuclear fusion. It's been hailed as the holy grail of clean energy for its potential to produce lots of it without requiring any fossil fuels or leaving behind any hazardous waste. The process mimics what powers the sun. It's been really hard to harness nuclear fusion energy, but now scientists are using artificial intelligence to help. This year, UK-based Jet Laboratory set a new world record, producing 69 megajoules of energy over 5 seconds. That's only enough to heat around 5 hot baths, but scale it up, and it could be the world's answer to limitless clean power. So what is the role of nuclear in powering our future? And how green will it really be?
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi ends his first visit to Australia in 7 years. We'll be assessing the outcomes with a former Australian Minister for Trade, Investment and Tourism.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with global business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
Well, China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us.
And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us, excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why? This is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back. A reminder of our top stories. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken arrives in Egypt after revealing the U.S. has submitted a draft resolution to the United Nations calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. Our other headlines: world leaders gather for talks on promoting the environmental benefits of nuclear energy. Well, let's see if we can pick up on that story now and go back to our correspondent, Stuart Smith, who's watching this summit for us. Stuart, just tell us more about why this is happening.
Well, there was a call at COP28 for leaders, nations and private investment to try and triple the amount of nuclear capacity in the world for nuclear energy by 2050. Now, for Europe, it's going the other way. That capacity since 2000 has decreased. It used to be a third in 2000. Now it's about 20%. And so leaders are here, investors are here to try to work out how to increase that. And one of the ways suggested by Charles Oppenheimer, the same Oppenheimer, the physicist who invented the nuclear bomb, he is now the grandson, part of an organization trying to lower the risk of nuclear threat and increase the funding and use of nuclear energy for science. And one of his suggestions was a greater role for private investment when it comes to funding nuclear energy.
If you look back 20 years ago, renewable energy per megawatt hour was almost uninvestable, but private firms and government entities did get into it at higher rates, and by increasing that rate of investment, it's decreased in price over time. So right now we're just at the beginning point. If we could do one nuclear project with 20% private equity capital matching government, that would be a huge step.
Stuart, it's worth making the point that not everyone is on board with this, are they?
That's right. Even within the European Union, there are member states such as Germany that largely are against such a move. And we also saw an expression of unhappiness by civil society earlier today outside this summit by Greenpeace. Their activists and people against increasing the use of nuclear energy point to its massive costs. They point to the traditional concerns of dangers as well. But they also say that the timeline simply isn't there, that the call is to try to reach net zero by 2050, and nuclear projects, while would contribute to the energy mix of a nation and would reduce carbon emissions, they wouldn't do it in time, is their argument. So they say we should stick with renewables as a cheaper and also cleaner way to get to that target.
Stuart, thank you for that. Our correspondent Stuart Smith in Brussels. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi has ended his visit to Australia. Before leaving, Wang met the former Australian Prime Minister Paul Keating in Sydney. He thanked Keating for his efforts in promoting China-Australia relations. Wang also said China supports Australia making political decisions based on its own interests. Keating said China's development would maintain regional stability rather than pose a threat to other countries. Well, during Wang's visit, China and Australia agreed to boost trade and improve relations. Our correspondent Greg Navarro reports on the significance of this visit.
Business leaders made sure Australian wine was served to Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi at a luncheon in Canberra. A symbolic gesture designed to celebrate the industry's impending resumption of exports to China after nearly 4 years of crippling tariffs.
As relations have improved, both sides have been ready to resolve some issues with a more positive attitude. The latest progress is that the issue of wine exports has been addressed. China will release the final decision by the end of this month.
Wine is one of several Australian export items slapped with high tariffs and trade blockages by China in 2020. That was largely seen in retaliation to Australia's previous government calling for an international investigation into the origins of COVID-19. Many of those trade barriers have been removed as the two countries work to repair their relationship.
The past twists and turns over the decade leave us with lessons to draw on as well as valuable experience. I think that fundamentally it is about staying committed to mutual respect.
Wang Yi's first trip to Australia in 7 years was also a sign of a renewed approach to diplomacy between the two countries after years of a rocky relationship under Australia's previous governments.
You and I also agreed on the importance of dialogue between our two countries, not just to take forward our shared interests, but also to exchange views on the issues that matter to us and to navigate wisely any differences we have.
Wang Yi and his Australian counterpart, Foreign Minister Penny Wong, covered a range of issues in their 6th face-to-face meeting since 2022.
Every time we meet, our mutual trust is built upon further, and China-Australia relations advances. This is the value of strengthening strategic communication. It is positive progress, dispelling doubt and building trust.
Those topics included the removal of the remaining trade barriers on some Australian beef producers and the country's lobster industry, security concerns across the region, and tensions in the South China Sea.
Obviously, these topics underline that we do have important differences. Dialogue enables us to manage our differences.
In Sydney, Wang Yi met with former Australian Prime Minister Paul Keating. Keating has been an outspoken critic of the AUKUS trilateral agreement. That will see Australia acquire nuclear-powered submarines using U.S. technology with support from the U.K. China has also been critical of the agreement.
All in all, our relations are now on the right track and should not hesitate. We should not let it veer off course and shouldn't go backwards. Since we have made clear our direction, we should strive to go steadily, soundly, and far. This is in the common interests of our two countries and the common expectation of countries in the region.
Both countries say Wang Yi's trip could also pave the way for an Australian visit by Chinese Premier Li Qiang later this year. Greg Navarro, CGTN, Canberra.
Our correspondent Li Jianhua has been speaking to Andrew Robb, the former Australian Minister for Trade, Investment and Tourism.
Well, trade has been fundamental to the relationship. I mean, we're only a small country in terms of people, 25 million against 1.4 billion. But I think China, of course, is our biggest trading partner, like they are with about 130 countries. But I think we're about number 7 for China in terms of their trading. We are always going to have political differences. It's just how you handle those differences that is critical. And, I think we made some mistakes in terms of the way in which we handled the introduction of a lot of security measures. They're very important security measures for Australia and our allies. Our allies didn't get trade sanctions, and yet they put in all the same security measures that we had. So, in fact, they took advantage. They encouraged us to keep, aggressively our rhetoric with China, to keep that up. But at the same time, as the sanctions came in, all of our allies, especially the United States, took all our markets. So it was, it was not the smartest thing to rub the nose of our biggest trading partner.
And that China has been really concerned about AUKUS, and it may affect the future trade ties between China and Australia again. So what's your take on that?
It's not China directed, but it's an important initiative. And, China's putting in security initiatives. We're putting in security initiatives. This is what companies do the whole time. this is their responsibility, is to make sure that every government, their prime responsibility is to make sure of the safety of their people.
The Chinese government has pledged $9.3 billion to create jobs in 2024 as more young people struggle to find work. Figures show the unemployment rate among young people aged 16 to 24 reached 15.3% last month. That's 0.7% higher than in January. China resumed releasing youth unemployment data in December after pausing publishing the data while it changed how it measured the figure. The Swiss National Bank has cut its key interest rate by 25 basis points to 1.5%, becoming the first major economy to do so. The surprise move sent the Swiss franc to an 8-month low against the euro. This comes after the US Federal Reserve left its benchmark interest rate unchanged. Working in extreme heat can double the chances of a stillbirth or miscarriage in pregnant women. That's according to new research from India. Hotter summers can impact pregnant women in tropical climates, as well as in places like the UK. They say pregnant women can protect themselves by avoiding prolonged periods in the heat, taking regular breaks in the shade, and keeping hydrated. The headlines again. The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken arrives in Egypt after revealing the US has submitted a draft resolution to the United Nations calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. Our other headlines: world leaders gather for talks on promoting the environmental benefits of nuclear energy. And that is the world today. Thank you for watching. There's more news on CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app, or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone. We're back with more news at the top of this hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Hello and welcome to the weather forecast. I'm Tierney. Well, over to Europe. Wintry weather will persist for another couple of days here for portions in the north as well as the east of continent. And meanwhile, we're also likely to see round or pretty widespread showers to develop here from Iberia Peninsula all the way towards into the western portion of Russia over this weekend, mostly under the influence of an easterly moving upper level low trough. So please take a necessary precaution to stay safe. And speaking of the maximum temperatures forecast over the next couple of days, we can notice that here for many portions of Spain and France, we'll probably see the high temperatures bouncing back up into the 20s or even into the upper 20s over this weekend. Even for the north as well as the eastern portions of the continent will also grab a warming trend in their high temperatures. Most of the maximum temperatures will be bouncing back up into the 5 degrees Celsius or even warmer over this weekend. So please enjoy the warm weather as well as you can. And about business and travel, showers for London during the morning hours with a high of 12 and low about 4 degrees Celsius. And down in Madrid, we'll see some partly sunny skies. But notice that the temperatures difference between the highs and the lows will be rather big, even about 15 degrees Celsius here on Saturday. So please dress up accordingly. And here for Brussels, we'll see chance of showers and a high of 12 degrees Celsius is in the forecast here for the city of Berlin on Saturday. And that is all from me. Stay tuned for more Sit Forecast.